Okay. Recording again. I believe I am recording. Hope I didn't lose that. Okay. Let's see. Back to review. The important points from chapter 5 are the aggregate functions. We are using 5 of them. I would expect you to remember what those are: minimum, maximum, count, average, and minimum, maximum, count, average, sum. And the difference between counting a field and counting the star, counting everything. I expect you to know our rule for using group by, the difference between the having and the where. Okay. If you didn't follow all that stuff about roll up and cube and grouping sets and over, that's okay. Non-standard. Let's talk about chapter 6 now. Or subqueries. I want to find the maximum invoice total in invoices. Select max invoice total. And now I know that the invoice total, the maximum invoice total that I have in that in invoices is this one. What is it? 37,000, some 38,000 close. And I want to know what vendor ID has the max. So I could say something like this: select vendor ID. Yeah, thank you very much. Does happen on occasion. Vendor ID max from invoices, and I have triggered our rule. What do I have to have? I have to have a group by. So I have to group by vendor ID. And since I want to know, so I'm going to say as T. I'll frequently just give them single letter names. And now I can say order by T descending. So when I run this, I find out which vendor it is. I can do that by looking at the first row. So one of the things that we did in the earlier chapters was select the top 10 or the top 1 rows. I could say select top 1. I want to find all of the vendor IDs that have that, even when there's ties for the maximum. I want to get all of those vendor IDs. Now, in this particular one, I don't have any ties. But if there were ties, I would want to get them. I don't know how many ties I'm going to have. So I don't know that I can say select the top 10, top 2. How do I know how many there are? It turns out I only have 1, but that's just an accident of the data. Now, this is a little tricky to do in without this technique. This is the technique that is discussed in chapter 6. Okay. Chapter 6 talks about the idea of the subselect. Select vendor ID, invoice total from invoices. Now, I don't have any aggregate functions in here. Therefore, I don't have to have a group by in this guy from invoices. I'm going to have a where. Now, we have seen the in operator used before, where it's in a set. For example, in quote, Iowa, New Jersey. All right. Well, we can use that again. I will usually indent, select, max. The parentheses are required. Now, take a look at that. I want the vendor ID and the invoice total, where the invoice total is in that one. Now, what's that going to give me? That's going to give me back just one value, the maximum, max of the invoice total. So I want that. Now, if I have 3 of them that maximize that, I'll get 3. If I have 300, I'll get 300. When I run this, I find that vendor ID, and because I happened to have 1, I only got 1. But if I'd have had 3 or 4, I would have gotten all of them. Okay. I'm sorry. No, I would return all of the invoice numbers that had that maximum. So if I had another invoice number with the invoice total, um, on this one, on that subquery, yes, this is a subquery. The job of that subquery, the job of there's 2 queries running here. All right, an outer query and an inner query. The job of the inner query is just figuring out what the maximum is. The job of the outer query is to give me the vendor ID and the invoice total. Now, a moment ago, when I had them like this, I'm grouping them by vendor ID. So I'm going to see everybody, but the one that I want is going to be right at the very top. And that's one way to do it. Right? But this way gives me only the data that I'm interested in. Let's see if we have any that have. Let's see if I can get some. Where? Oh, yeah. There we go. I guess there are 3 invoices in there. from one vendor ID 115. Mm-hmm. If we put the distinct. I want to know the invoice ID. So there's some that I have some duplicates on the invoice IDs. I have 3 different invoice IDs that have the minimum amount on them. Now they all happen to be to the same vendor, but they're 3 different IDs. Questions? Okay, this demonstrates the idea of the subselect. And chapter 6 deals heavily with the subselect and that idea. Now, the fact of the matter is that you usually find them, the easiest place to understand them is in the where clause with an in on that, okay? Now, I'm going to point something out here. What is the result of a query? A table. Okay, I've said that before. A query gives you back a table. A query gives you back a table. What kind of thing then is in that subselect? It's a table with one value in it. What is invoice total? A field, and that field's type is a number of some kind, probably an integer, probably money. And we're going to see later on that anytime we fix the decimal point and we say this always has 4 decimals on it, I don't have to represent it as a decimal. I can represent it as an integer and just remember to put the decimal 4 places. It's kind of like I'll never talk about rate of pay as $10.32 an hour. You're going to make 1,032 cents an hour. So I'll always represent it as anytime I fix the decimal, I've got an integer. Okay, so where that number is in that set of numbers. And I'm cool with that. I'm down with that. Right? I'm fine with that. Now let's look at something different. What about this? Let me copy and paste. Equal. You're making faces at me, Miss Jane. Okay. Yes, it will, but I have a problem with it. What's my problem? They are not the same thing. What does equal mean? Is the same thing as. It's a little bit like the thing on the right-hand side of the equal is a set. It is a SQL statement that is returning a set. It makes sense to ask, is that number in that set? Okay. If I run this, it does work. I do not like it. We do not use equal on a set, but if I have one number and I use equal, what it will do, it will force it, it will coerce it a little bit, and it will interpret it as, oh, that it means in. Okay. No, no, because the query has to return one value before that'll work. So it has to be able to interpret it as what they mean is that number is equal to the 1, but the n is essentially the okay. Now I'll never have to use equal. I can always use n, because if I use n, it's going to work even if there's multiple values returned. So I can use n on one value. Let's look at this. Let's find out if I have any where it is equal to the average. I probably don't. Very few times will I have any average. I bet I don't get any, and I don't get any. Now, what it does make sense to ask where the invoice total is greater than the average. Now, this one is going to work. This one is going to return to me all of the invoice IDs with an invoice total greater than the average. Notice that I got 21 rows. I don't know what the average is by looking at that output, but I know that all those 21 rows, 1, 21, 31, 39, 43, and so on, are greater than the average. Question? Now, again, I don't care for this syntax up here where I use greater than, because it is not, I'm not really talking about greater. I've got a number on one side, and I'm asking is a number greater than a set of numbers. Even if the set of numbers only contains one number, there is a type mismatch there. Okay. Therefore, we have, I guess they listened to me because I complained bitterly about it when we used to do this. They have two other things, and greater than all. Now, notice that that one did not turn blue because it's not necessarily a standard one. Some of them don't have this. Greater than all that are in this set. So go into the set. Everything in there, the invoice total has to be greater than all of them. Well, how many things are in there? One. So obviously it is. But now when I say all, I am talking about resolving that set and logically comparing them one at a time to each number. So I'm talking about each number comparison, even though there's just one. Now I have resolved my problem with I'm saying a number is greater than a set. Does that make any sense? Besides all, I have the word any. I don't use it as much. Is greater than any in that set. So one of them says all of them, and one of them says at least one of them is greater than. Most of the time in a subquery, most of the time you will be returning only one value in the subquery. Now, this is a good trick to know. This is how you find information. Notice that the outer query can return anything. The where clause is deciding which ones I want. I want the ones that match the average or greater than the average. So everything greater than average. And I like to use the all there. So when you want greater than something, greater than where that the invoice total is greater than, less than, equal to, I would use in. Not equal to, I would use not in. I suppose you could say equal to all or equal to any. I would just say in. So equal to, not equal to, I'm going to use in. If it's greater than, less than, greater than or equal to any of those four, I'm going to use either all or any, depending on which one I want. If it just has one value in it, and many times that will be the case, when there's just one value in that subselect, it doesn't matter whether you're using all or any. It will change it slightly if it returns several values. For example, I want to find everyone. Do you guys know what a standard deviation is? Yes. I'll find everyone that's within the first standard deviation. Okay. Now I'm going to get a range of values. And now when I want to go in and find those invoice IDs, I'm going to have to say greater than all or less than all. Okay, questions? I prefer to, anytime I'm using greater than or less than, I prefer to use the all. Now, this is the first example of a subquery. They do get complicated here. Typically, a subquery steps around the idea, let's just do some grouping without having to have a group by. Because notice that the aggregate function is hidden down there in that subselect. Therefore, it doesn't affect the outer query. Outer query, I don't have an aggregate in there. So it runs as two separate queries. Most of the time, I can write a query as a table join or as a subquery. I don't know that most of the time counts, certainly many times. I have my choice of writing as a subquery or as a table join, inner join. And we're going to talk more about that as we go. I'm going to find that I can have a subquery. This one is in the where clause. Since the output of a query is a table, listen to this, I can select from a query. I can have a subquery in the from line. Okay. Now that gets a little bit more complicated. Where line. Most of the time, the subqueries, we're going to start off with subqueries in the where line. That makes life a lot easier because it's just an in or a greater than all. When I put it in the from line, it becomes, the book calls a derived table. I guess it is. I just call it a subquery. And we're going to do that. What time is it? It's 11:43. I believe I'm going to wrap up there because I don't want to try to do the next module today. I'm just introducing it and looking where we're going. This is the topic, what's on the board now, the subquery, multiple queries. And I can nest them as many deep as I want to. But this is a common one that is on the board, that is on the screen now. And any questions that we have right now? Very well. I'm going to wrap up there for the day. The assignment then will be posted. I will get these files out up on Canvas. I usually wait till I've finished before I put them up there. And I'm going to end the recording, the meeting now.